Recorded at the Kitchen Studios. This is the Pencil Pushers Podcast.
Welcome, Leadheads, to the Pencil Pushers Podcast, and you are listening to episode 20. I'm your host, Mike Rosato, and I'm pumped to share with you my conversation with the masterful Mary Kate McDevitt. She is without a doubt a force in the graphic arts world, largely focused on hand-drawn illustration and lettering. Here we talk about her prolific career that is already jam-packed with work that anyone at any age would be proud of, working with such companies as Target, Smuckers, Sesame Street, and more. But we also have a great talk about some of the deeper yet very common issues that we all deal with, like burnout and how to work through it. This is truly one of my favorite chats, coincidentally with one of my favorite artists working today. So what more can I say? I invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy my chat with Mary Kate. We are here with Mary Kate McDevitt. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing really great. I'm super honored to have you here. It's really a thrill for all of us. And I know that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be listening to this podcast that are very familiar with your work. But as I've always prefaced with a lot of people that we've had as guests, we like to get a little bit of backstory to get some more understanding of where art became really of importance to you, and also to talk a little bit more about your background as a whole as an artist, because the Pencil Pushers podcast is about the hand-drawn art. So we have people in animation and illustration and comic book art and stuff like that. So if you don't mind, I'd love to talk a little bit about where art became something of importance to you. You're from Philadelphia, is that right?
Yeah, I'm from outside of Philly. I grew up in the suburbs outside of Philly. Where do we want to start? From the very beginning?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah,
I guess, yeah, like growing up, I was definitely always interested in art. Like having getting art supplies as gifts was always really super common. I kept a lot of sketchbooks even as a kid too.
Yeah.
Something that I was recently going through when my mom was cleaning out her attic, how much I used to draw, which I almost forgot. And I kind of kept that interest through high school, art class being my favorite.
You have siblings and stuff? Were they interested in art or anything?
I have a sister, Jane, and she's the other side of the brain.
Right.
I always forget what the left side is the creative, side of the brain is the creative side.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, she is a doctor.
Okay,
a research doctor, and she works at Temple doing research in sports medicine.
Oh, okay, nice.
So,
yeah, I think
pretty
I was
different
just
fields.
Yeah, definitely. I was just kind of chuckling to myself, thinking about it's pretty hilarious how the two creatives did not know the analytical part of that answer there. That was pretty funny.
Yeah, I know. Like,
so
what's the brain? Jane would be upset because she does a lot. That's my sister's.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and actually, not a lot of artists in my family at all. Or really any. I have a cousin who's interested in art, but my parents were never really artists or anything like that. So, but they encouraged it, and they saw that it was something that I was passionate about. So encouraging me to follow art was really valuable for me, because, it's to decide to go to art school. And I went to Tyler School of Art in Philly.
Yeah.
For undergrad, and who lets their kid go to art school without any real career promise potentially? I didn't even know I was going to be entering into design at all. I just went into art school because I liked drawing.
Yeah.
But
so I know that you were, I think I had read you were leaning towards, at least in the beginning part of your college career, you were leaning towards maybe leaning into painting. Is that right? And then it kind of formed into,
I mean, it was like when it came time to decide your major, which I guess is like your first semester of sophomore year, I was taking a lot of different classes. I had a couple of painting classes, fibrous classes, and a graphic design class. And I immediately found that I liked the graphic design class most, because just the getting a project, an assignment with like a clear goal that I had to kind of figure out. Everyone's like problem solving, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And with painting, it was just like, what do I want to paint? What do I feel inspired by? It's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I want to paint this cup. I want to paint some peaches, I guess. It's just like, I really found quickly that it's just like, okay, this isn't enough to really drive a painting career.
Right.
And even though I was getting some pretty positive feedback from my painting professor, I pretty much knew that I didn't really care that much about painting. And I found myself spending a lot more time on my design projects and ultimately majored in design. But what I found in my graphic design classes was I still really did like drawing a lot and including illustration in my projects. And all my projects had a lot of illustration and textures. I wanted everything to be like really handmade. And everything looked like pretty impossible to reproduce.
Yeah.
Like everything had like special folds and special like textures and things like that. And so that's kind of where I started including lettering in my projects. I was working on a logo for a restaurant project, and I remember presenting my sketches.
And this was still at Tyler. This was like for a school project. Yeah.
So this was like a project in junior year, because I had my sketches up on the board, and my professor was like, "This is the final. Like, just do this." And I'm just like, "It's just there's no font. Like, what font am I gonna use?"
Right.
And he's just like, "Just draw it." And it was kind of the first time I was like, oh, okay, like that's a thing. And then I ended up having the whole menu was hand lettered, and this was probably 2005. So it was, at least for me, pretty early on in discovering lettering, and that's something that I was interested in.
Yeah. No, but did you? So there was obviously this spark. I mean, obviously this professor had some secret powers to get you to just go. What was it that kind of like got them to, you saw that as like, oh, I guess you just saw it as like something where you could utilize the sort of handcrafted part. And was that the lure that you said, well, maybe, because I know that you had said in an article I had read that you struggle with design in terms of like, your kind of classic graphic design. So was that when you saw that you could kind of make your own forms, was that kind of like, was that the inspiration for you to keep exploring that? And then did you start kind of seeking that out with who else is doing that kind of thing to make you think that I could probably do it as a career?
Totally. Yeah. Like when if I were to like get started working straight into the computer, I'm lost.
Yeah.
But when I started on paper and even just like making layouts and kind of sketching out what I want it to look like, if I were to recreate on the computer, it's lost its magic. So when I found that I can just do it all on paper, and nowadays the iPad or the Cintiq, it felt much more like my work.
Yeah.
And then I started finding other artists that had like a really hand-drawn illustration and lettering style. Like one of my first influences was Johnny Hanna, and he does a lot of children's books and book covers, and he's an illustrator and letterer, and he's really had a really beautiful style that combined both those both lettering and illustration in a way that was really cohesive, and that was really inspiring to me. And also Nate Williams, early on, he did a lot of lettering and illustration, and he had do you guys remember that site Illustration Mundo? That was like one of the first sites that I would go to.
What was it called?
For new illustration. It's oh my gosh, I think it was called Illustration Mundo. I think he took it down like maybe even like 8 years ago.
Okay.
So a while ago. It was one of those first sites. But Nate Williams was one of my early influences too.
Okay, nice. it's also interesting. I have a good friend that I went to Savannah College of Art and Design, and my first year I was playing in a band with a guy who's from Philadelphia, and I went to go visit him like several years ago, and wasn't really that familiar with Philadelphia, but he's still a musician. He's an art teacher and like a community art teacher, but he's also a muralist. And I just was like, he kind of gave me a tour of the city, and I realized that like Philadelphia is amazing with their mural art. I mean, it's just incredible. So I'm just wondering if like in some way you were just by just going about your day, I'm sure you were influenced to some degree by that whole culture. Like it's almost in your DNA to some degree. Would you think that you're influenced by that?
I think so. I mean, I think just like being exposed to art, yeah, like you said, everywhere you go, like there's a mural or something everywhere, and that is like, yeah, pretty awesome. I remember like going to other cities and kind of discovering that it is pretty unique to Philly to have that many murals everywhere.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd say Philly in general is a pretty inspiring city.
Yeah.
I really like history, and I really like historical, cities and streets and houses. So even just that, walking around Philly is always really inspiring to me.
Yeah, definitely. So you got out of college, and I mean, for those that aren't that familiar with Mary Kate's work, firstly, why not? But secondly, for those that don't know, she is a fantastic illustrator and letterer. And is it letterer or letterist? Which one is it?
Letterer.
Yeah,
lettering
letterer?
artist, letterist. Why not?
Yeah, sure.
They're all kind of awkward terms.
Right.
I say letterer and lettering artist.
Yeah. So so you graduated in 2005 around that time, is that right?
2007.
2007. And now you have done so much work where you're working with major companies, Target, Smuckers, Sesame Street, Nintendo, Macy's. Can you walk us through a little bit of like how that came to be? I mean, within a span of 12 years, you've done so much. What was it what was the entry point, I guess, to opening yourself up to these larger companies?
It's one of those things that it happened so gradual. It's like hard to really pinpoint something that happened. So it was just like right out of school, I did get a job at a small design studio in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And around that time is when I started doing a lot of side projects and selling stuff on Etsy. So I was making screen printed posters, and I was making these hand painted chalkboards that had lettered like little phrases on them, and I called them mini goals chalkboards, and a bunch of other stuff. And so around that time, 2007, 2008, I was posting this stuff, and that was like a big, like the blog boom around that time.
Right.
So I was emailing blogs with like little pitches about like, hey, would you be interested in featuring my products or blah, blah, blah. And because they always were looking for new content. They said it there in their about pages, like submit your work, see if you'd be and we'll feature your work.
Nice.
And so I was lucky to have my work featured on a lot of these blogs, which then started growing some sort of following.
Yeah.
And then ultimately it landed on another blog, which caught the eye of an editor at Chronicle Books. And the mini goals chalkboard that I was doing we published it as a notepad called the Mini Goals Notepad.
Wow.
And that was early 2009 that I started working with them. And
so it was essentially just the cover art, right? Like you weren't doing anything on the inside or anything?
And the interiors were all it was just like a notepad of different, the same phrases that I had on the chalkboard. So,
wow.
And that project, I was so nervous. Everything, I didn't know how to work with a publisher. I didn't realize like the timeline is like super quick kind of. And I guess for like a notepad and maybe like the first time working with an author, and being an author, like that I was like in the contract, I was called an author. I'm like, whoa, this is intense. It was like my first real freelance client. And this is the most intense experience ever.
What was the turnaround time for that?
What's that?
What was the turnaround time for that?
I don't remember. I think it was a few months, so not nothing. But I was still working, and I was just, I think the panic of it all, I was just like trying to organize it in a way, and I don't know. It felt like time moved quickly.
Yeah.
And so, handing off artwork to be printed in like, thousands of prints was anxiety inducing.
I bet.
But it was that one project, and working with Chronicle and having the opportunity to continue working with Chronicle is what really launched my freelance career. It made me switch to freelance because I'm like, hey, if I'm working with my dream client already, surely it's going to just kind of go upwards.
Yeah. And so
around that time, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Around that time is when I up and moved to Portland, Oregon, out west.
Okay.
And I figured I needed, if I'm going to do, like they talk, people talk about making the leap into freelance. I seriously took a big leap into freelance because I really wanted it to happen. And I really felt that kind of stepping out of my comfort zone, being around, my home base, I guess, and being around like a familiar environment would maybe lead me to be more comfortable and not take as many risks. So moving cross country and meeting a bunch of new people and putting myself in a completely new creative environment really helped me. So I was making a lot of stuff for Etsy because I was still not taking on a lot of freelance work.
So you were basically, you were still focusing largely on personal projects, more like, and then selling those. Okay. Yeah.
So I was just like, I was paying the rent, basically selling stuff on Etsy and doing as many craft shows as I could. I was doing as many as around Portland as I could. I had done a couple in San Francisco, anywhere that was like sort of drivable. Seattle, I had done a few, and it was like such a really great place to meet people and obviously sell stuff. And I ended up, and I actually didn't know this until like after the project wrapped up, but I met an art director that I worked with at Women's Health magazine.
Okay.
And she was like, after we wrapped up the project, she was like, oh, by the way, I met you and bought one of your prints at, and I was like, you're just telling me this now?
Wow.
But it was great. It was like, because sometimes, a lot of the times I don't know where people find me.
Yeah.
And it's great, but it's just like, like we met in person. You're just bringing this up now. It was hilarious. But it really was, and I still believe, like, when people ask about starting out, like, creating personal work, even though it's a very saturated market now, even then it was, and doing craft shows, it's such good practice to sell your work and sell your work, not just in like terms of money, but like selling your work, like selling your, in a marketing way.
Yeah. And your kind of your artistic personality, like in essence, you were developing a brand.
Yeah.
Right.
And like talking and making connections and being able to talk about your work. And that's all really important practice as a freelancer.
Yeah. I think that's a huge tip. I mean, you were really smart by going straight to influencers, right? By starting to send stuff to blogs, which would obviously, if they've got a wide enough audience, part of that audience is probably going to be, people who are publishers, editors, creative directors, etc. If you hit the right ones.
Exactly. And the blog industry is, it's not quite what it used to be. Like some of the biggest blogs that I was on that led to a lot of those projects, like Design Work Life is no longer around. Design Sponge, she just ended, Grace just ended Design Sponge, and Drawn, which is the blog that got the attention of the Mini Goals Chalkboard.
Yeah.
He found me on there.
Yeah.
And that's no longer around either. So I don't know what blogs to suggest people to reach out to. I think maybe podcasts are now the thing. Get on a podcast.
Right. Well, I mean, I know the way that I found you was through Skillshare, which was, I mean, you hit that at a great time too, when Skillshare was really just starting out. I think it was pretty much at its infancy, like maybe within the first year or so. It was pretty new when I first saw yours and I took your class. I got to say that I took your class. It was fantastic, but I'm not as good as you now. So is there like a
you get a full refund,
like a 102 that I need to be looking out for or anything? But anyway, that's how I found out about you. And I think that's another great outlet. I think, Skillshare was great, in terms of like its longevity, because you can sign up as a member, and maybe with blogs it's a little bit more difficult to sustain. But regardless, it's just very smart to be going after blogs and stuff like that, and then obviously going through Skillshare.
Yeah.
I thought it was a pretty funny story about where I saw that you were anticipating, well, maybe we'll get, through this Skillshare thing, I'll get like 500 people to sign up. And it was like 30,000 or something. It's crazy.
It was crazy. I don't even know how many, but I don't like to know how many students are on that class because, like you said, it was, I guess it was around, I think it was 2013.
Yeah.
Because I made that class when I moved to New York, and they had reached out to me like a year before. So I think I signed up like a year after they really launched and stuff. And when they reached out to me for the first time, I'm like, oh no, I can't do that.
Yeah.
And they kept emailing, and I'm so glad they were not giving up on me.
Yeah.
Because it really was such a great opportunity, and I did have a lot of fun making it. But as I was saying, that first class is so embarrassing. My like little intro video, oh my God, I have the most patient friend who helped me take video of that class.
Like over and over.
And he helped edit it.
Yeah.
And I was just like, take one. And I'm like standing so awkwardly, and I'm like trying to remember my rehearsed lines.
Yeah. Yeah.
As if I oh my gosh.
Like 3 days
so
later,
awkward.
You're like, take 3,123.
Yeah. I mean.
Yeah. You think I'm joking, but
realistic.
Right.
But once I was actually going through my process, it was much more natural. So like the second day of filming was essentially the rest of the class, or like a day and a half was the rest of the class. And it's a long class.
Yeah.
Now I think Skillshare prefers the classes to kind of stay in like a half hour.
Sure.
Because it's like, who has it's like a feature-length film of just watching someone draw and kind of like talk you through it. I do have, well, honestly, I've been saying this for like a year, but I do have plans for new videos.
Oh, cool.
One, because my process has changed. I have a Cintiq, so all my drawing happens directly on the screen. So when people talk about scanning in Photoshop, bringing in Illustrator, I'm like, oh gosh, my my process is so long-winded.
Yeah. So are you
I'm
going to
so
do that?
sorry you guys are still doing that.
Are you doing that through Skillshare as well? Is that going to be going through that, or is it going to be separate?
Yeah, I'll be going through Skillshare.
Okay.
I like the platform, and I do have a following on Skillshare, so it makes sense for me to continue with them. And so I think I have 6 classes on there, and obviously the first one is the most popular, which is really fun. I think it's really great to see people interested in lettering and trying that as a tool to include in their work.
Yeah,
I enjoy teaching.
Curious to get your thoughts on this. I started this podcast back in March or April of this year, and one of the reasons why I did it was not only because I wanted to talk to creative thinkers to learn as much as I could as a personal note, but I also saw that there was an opportunity to kind of meld all these mediums together and get a full conversation and a full community all talking potentially. But the other reason is because I was really afraid to do it. So, and I wonder if, in some ways Skillshare was the same, you kind of had the same thing for you. Because as you say now, you love to teach, you learned how to be more comfortable maybe in your own skin to even just present to thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people potentially. Would you say that that's the case for you too? And would you suggest that to others to try that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if it is something that you're afraid of, and especially if it's like one of the things that I was so afraid because I was like, I didn't have I couldn't find something to like almost like imitate or something. There wasn't another video quite like what I wanted to do out there.
Yeah.
Which is scary because then it's like, well, it's all on you. Like your ideas of how you're going to teach this class and the methods that are going to make, the process make most sense to a wide range of people. Yeah. This is the first time you're going to be doing it. It might, I don't know if it was completely new kind of idea or whatever, but seeing that kind of instructional film or video, I didn't really see anything like that. So it was just like, that was kind of terrifying. But then it's like, well, that's kind of, means you're probably on to a good, it's probably a good thing for you to put out there if it doesn't quite exist yet. So I think like if you are afraid to do something, it probably means you're on the right track.
Right. And I'm assuming based on how much work you've done, you've had many steps of, I've never done this before. And so you probably get to a rhythm of seeing that, well, at the end of the day, even if I quote unquote, whatever people deem as fail, I'm still going to learn something from it. I'm assuming you probably have that philosophy to some degree.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
No, that's all right. Kind of leading into that a little bit, I still, as you continue to grow and get into working with all of these major corporations, I'm sure that you have a lot of pressure that comes into play when the stakes are maybe a little bit higher. Do you feel that is an issue with you, or do you have just more of a natural rhythm now that you understand how it is and it's easier as it kind of moves along?
I definitely would say it gets easier and it's not as daunting, especially like working with a bigger client that it used to be, because now I feel a lot more comfortable in my style. I know what kind of questions to ask a client to make sure we're on the same page, because early on in my career, especially working with a bigger client, I'm like, oh, I assume they want something like this.
Right.
And it wasn't necessarily a style I worked in. So there was a lot of like, oh, what is this thing you present? I'm like, I assume this is what you would be kind of going for? And it's just like, well, it doesn't really look like your work. And I'm like, right, I see. It's not a guessing game. You hired me for a reason.
Yeah, yeah.
So just having a large body of work. I know a lot of people like having a really curated website with like their most pared down stuff, but I really do like exploring different styles and including illustration and lettering, only doing lettering, really rough lettering, somewhat more polished lettering. So I definitely like working in a wider range of styles. So I generally have my clients feel like, what brought you to me? Which kind of direction?
And they're saying, oh, I like that style
for?
and this style here, and it kind of guides you to a little bit of a direction. Yeah.
Yeah. So we, and just kind of making sure I kind of talk about like the kind of tone and all those kind of like what's the audience, just making sure that we're on the same page in terms of what we want it to look like. It's like that becomes my focus and not this big client or where it's going to exist in the world.
Yeah.
I leave that kind of out of my mind, but it is important to keep that in mind. Like people are going to see this.
Yeah, of course.
Because you want a little bit of pressure, but you also want to, you do you kind of thing.
Absolutely. I one of the questions that I was asking when we were first making a connection was, what is it that you would like to talk about? And I think it's a really nice tie-in because it makes me ask these questions about working for all these corporations and, these sort of like big expectations. And you said you wanted to talk about burnout. And I would imagine that with the intensity of working for the expectation of working for these large clients, that many times you probably have multiple projects that are kind of happening at once. Is for somebody like you who is so prolific and working with so many different big clients like this, what is burnout to you, and how do you work through that?
So this past summer and kind of like last spring, I went through the most intense bout of burnout I've ever had. It's like before that, I would say like, oh, I'm so burnt out on work. And meanwhile, I'm still totally productive and able to get work done. Where it's just like, I didn't even know what burnout meant. And now I kind of have a new understanding.
Yeah.
But I essentially feel like it kind of came from a few things. I used to, and I still kind of live or work by this rule of roll with it and gain momentum. I have a poster of it. I have it's a term I use a lot in my talks, just about like making a freelance career happen. And it kind of means like setting really loose goals and just like making sure that you're learning from everything. But the problem with that is if you're rolling with it, that's fine. Gaining momentum, you have to slow down at some point. You roll with it, gain momentum, and crash and burn. That's not the motivational poster people want to hear. So I've really discovered that it's like roll with it, gain momentum, slow down, pause, come to a complete stop every once in a while, because I was taking on so much work, taking on any project that kind of came along. And I am really lucky to get projects that I enjoy, almost all the projects that come across my desk.
Yeah.
So it is really, really hard to turn down work. And I'm really bad at saying no in general. And I'm also, I put a lot of pressure on myself to continue making personal work. So I felt like if I don't have a couple of client projects going on and I don't have maybe a book project in the works to do a pitch for, and I don't have personal work that I'm posting on Instagram or something, then I'm not succeeding.
Right.
And I put so much of my value on my productivity that it really started to wear on me.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where I couldn't do any personal work. I could barely, like, I started working from home instead of going to my studio, and I honestly, I couldn't even look at my studio. I would walk by it. It's like within walking distance of my house, and it would just like fill me with anxiety. And I was just able to get by with my client work that I was still taking on. I recently signed up with a rep, so I was able to kind of have, if I wanted to turn down a project, I would have him do it, which is kind of the benefit of having a rep.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I can't do that project. And so I then kind of realized that I was experiencing burnout, and then I made a more proactive approach to getting out of it or accepting it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was listening to a lot of like talks about vulnerability and acceptance and radical acceptance, and just being like, okay, you're in this position that you're not satisfied with. You have to accept that entirely and just know that things are going to change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And just the fact that I knew that this is not permanent, things will get better, was all I needed to start really taking slow steps of getting out of it. So every day I would be like, try and just sit at my desk, get emails done, do the client work, get that out of the way. Not to, I mean, I still kind of enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah,
it's really difficult.
It is.
And there's a lot of shame attached to not feeling passionate about your work, because it was something that I really hadn't experienced before.
Right.
So I felt a lot of shame about not being like, hustle, I'm obsessed with my work. And it was just like, God, I want something else, I think. I don't know. Like, what else could I do? So to reach that productivity high that you get, I just started making really ugly drawings. I'm just going to open my sketchbook, draw something. I'm not going to like it, and I'm not going to look at it again, but I put pencil to paper, or I would play in my iPad, make something really ugly, and just like that scratched an itch that I needed to scratch.
Yeah.
And just slowly ugly sketched my way out of burnout, I think.
Wow, that's fascinating. So is it safe to say that doing the quote unquote ugly drawings is that because I think, it was sort of, I sort of prefaced the question a little bit incorrectly, because I think I say, oh, well, you're working with these big clients, but the reality is that at every level, I think every designer, every artist feels that pressure of being burned out, because particularly when you're a freelancer, you are, there's no two ways about it. You are your own business. You are a business person at that point. So as I've talked about this on a number of different occasions and different conversations with the podcast, we are our own business, which means we now have to do the art and the business side. And like we've said earlier at this conversation, they are two sides of your brain, really. Right. And then, I think it's really poignant talking about shame too, because I also think that there's a shame that we feel for literally taking time to just relax, debrief, go, sit on a couch and watch TV for 2 hours, for God's sake, like even that. So it's a really big issue. And I think you're finding ways to try to manage that, but and everybody's got their own way to do that, whether it's yoga or exercise or whatever, right?
Yeah, and I mean, yes, like a lot of it to kind of break out of that burnout was doing stuff completely outside of work, stuff that I enjoyed doing, that I kind of took advantage of not feeling up to being at my studio all day, every day, and taking advantage of it by doing like a few day trips or like randomly going to the art museum. It's like kind of a easy walk to take a stroll there. And, you know, it's things that I wouldn't allow myself to do in the middle of the week. It felt wrong to kind of take time out of like a work day to do something that is potentially inspiring and maybe even work related. And that really helped take some of the shame off of not feeling productive in terms of creating work. Especially personal work was a big thing that I felt was like really missing from my day-to-day arsenal of things that I would work on, because it was so it's almost like I would do like a daily drawing almost, not necessarily something I share, but I was constantly, you know, making something just for me in terms of a warm up or something, a technique I wanted to try out, or if I got new brushes or something, I would just be, and I just didn't have it in me at that time.
God, I don't know if you've talked much about this, but I feel like, if you don't mind me saying, I just think that somebody in your position who's got such authority as an important figure in design, I think that this is like something that potentially you should talk about more in your talks that you get invited to. I just think that it's really important for everybody to hear that you go through that too. And the reality is I found this to be the case with so many. I mean, I talked to Lisa Congdon. We had a great discussion about that last. I guess it was a couple of weeks ago. I had a conversation with Louise Lockhart. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Printed Peanut.
Oh yeah.
And she's she's incredibly prolific, and she has a child now, and she works from home, and she doesn't just do design. She does like she makes the product. She does all the fulfillment herself. She does it all herself. And I'm like, where do we? That's why I love this podcast and having conversations like this, because I do feel like having more of these conversations gives us the ability to recognize this in all of us, and then collectively we can figure out ways to work our way out of it, and to get back to what we started this for in the first place, which is to be at play creatively. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's super helpful to hear people in positions like, or people who you look up to potentially, that we're not robots who can just churn out work. We have personal lives and things going on outside of work, believe it or not. Like when I think about, especially like new mothers, like continuing work, I'm just like, I can't imagine how stressful that could be.
Yeah.
Sometimes I have like, I'm not going to compare my cats and my dog to new babies. Sorry.
Right. Yeah.
But sometimes I feel like I'm running a farm at my house, just like dealing with an old dog and feeding 2 cats.
Yeah. Wow.
Not the same.
Right.
I promise I'm not making that.
But I appreciate it though.
Sure. But and there was I had done a talk that I do talk about burnout a lot in the past two talks that I gave. And I did get a lot of really great feedback about like people who maybe they're experiencing burnout in their current position at their job, and how are they going to deal with that? And I'm just like, it's really hard to give really practical advice because it's different for everybody. But I think the one thing that helped me the most is just, it's like a very abstract theory, but like a radical acceptance, where it's just like, this is the position you're in. It will change.
I think that, and also as freelancers, we tend to be a little bit more isolated rather than working, in a big group setting. And again, that's one of the reasons why I think, podcasts are important, and also conferences are important. is the camaraderie, the ability to say we're not alone. You know, you're not alone in that kind of stuff. And it's easy to, when you're just working by yourself, it's easy to forget that, you know? So, I mean, these kinds of conversations,
totally.
I think are really, really important. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because when you're working by yourself and then you're looking on Pinterest or you're looking on Instagram and you're seeing, you know, the highlight reels essentially, it can be really discerning, or it can be, yeah, like why am I blanking on the word? It can be really a bummer to feel like everyone's doing so much better than me. And you're just sitting alone because you're not making connections to real people. You're just looking at the final product and you're thinking, oh, I'm not good enough. So it is important to make connections and hear stories like of real situations freelancers go through.
100%. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And it's awesome to hear you say that, because I know that I've felt that myself, which is why I love having conversations like this with you and others. So, but in the interest of time, and we're at 45 minutes. God, there's so much I would love to talk to you about.
Oh my God, that flew by.
Yeah, it really did. We'll have to do a part 2, though. It would be really awesome. I feel like there's a lot of meat on that bone. So, but we'll keep it here. I would love to. I'd love to, of course, have you back sometime at your convenience. But could you tell us a little bit more about what projects you're working on now, and that people can look out for, or maybe something that's just been released, and then finally where people can find you at that may not be familiar with you.
Okay, so right now I'm working on a personal project I'm working on is I'm doing a daily animation till Christmas, and I'm currently on day 5.
Really? What are you working in?
It's I'm creating animations in Photoshop.
Oh, so they're like kind of GIFs, like GIFs or something, or?
Yeah,
okay.
They're like simple, like they're getting a little bit more complicated. I have ideas that I'm like, oh, and then this happens, and I'm like, let's not.
Yeah.
Try and keep it under 10 seconds. 10 seconds is like 200 frames.
Oh, I know, yeah.
It's crazy. So follow me on Instagram at Mary Kate McDevitt to follow along that. I'm also about to, right now I have it for pre-order, but my sampler booklet that I do every year, the new one is out. It's called It's All Part of the Progress.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of the themes we talked about right today. So it's the positivity sampler. So it's full of really fun illustrations and lettering all about motivation and creative block and burnout. So that's on my shop.
Killer.
Right now I'm working on stuff that, gosh, I kind of can't talk about, which is kind of a bummer because I'm really excited about some of these projects. I know. It's such a cop-out being like, oh, if only you guys knew how awesome all the stuff I'm working on. But I can't tell. It's top secret.
Right.
But one of my projects that just came out was the Work at Desk Jotter, which is a desk calendar that I work on with Workman Publishing. So you can find that Work at Desk Jotter on Amazon. What's another project that just came out? This kind of came out a few months ago, but it's something I'm really proud of, and I just kind of want to put it on a podcast.
Yeah, do it. Yes.
I did the lettering for the book Baking with Kim Joy, and she was a contestant on the Great British Bake Off show, which is one of my absolute favorite shows. I love it so much. So when I was contacted to do the lettering for her book, and we're now like pals on Instagram, so sometimes we chat, no big deal. But that is a project that I was really proud of, and I also just like love how it turned out. So sometimes it's like it's sort of a rare bird when it's just like I love the way it looks. The client was awesome. The whole process was really great. So I'm excited. I'm
Wow.
still
Big,
psyched about that
big
project.
congratulations on that.
Thank
That's
you.
awesome. That's awesome. Cool. So I guess on the stuff that you can't talk about yet, we'll just have to try and find you when they are released. How's that?
Yeah, that will be the part 2. I'm sure it'll probably be wrapped up and able to talk about then. So.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Mary Kate, it's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you so much, Mike, for having me on. It was such a pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah, definitely. We'll do it again soon, okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, you take care. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Pencil Pushers Podcast. Follow us on Instagram at the Pencil Pushers Podcast for visual representation of our guest artwork, topics discussed, and anything else that contributes to the show. So be sure to subscribe. Tell a friend. Tell lots and lots of friends. Become a leadhead. And we're out.